Traders, how are you? With Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy, co-founder of Speed Up Trader. We're in the blizzard, the storm up in the Northeast. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Let's get going. So overall, we have robots taking over the workforce, we have storms, we have a war incoming, a lot of things going on this week. Inflation numbers are also exploding as well. Overall for the week, stocks did well. U.S. markets went up. The Dow went up 1.04%. The S&P 500 went up 1.54%. And the NASDAQ, after having its worst January since 2008, and on Thursday, the worst fall since 2020, thanks to Facebook, that ended up positive for the week at 2.37%. The European markets overall were mixed for the week as well. They had a negative day on Friday after we have this dynamic overall that's going on right now where a lot of central banks are starting to pull back the easy monetary policy, which basically means they're not going to help the economies as much, right? Everybody around the world after their pandemic and even after 2009, the crisis, 2008, just slammed the interest rates to the floor. That caused artificially a lot of assets to increase, like the stock market, like real estate. And now we have a lot of those central banks that are starting to pull back, especially since the inflation numbers, which is mostly exported out of the United States, are starting to increase quite a bit. So the Bank of England and the ECB, I'm going to let you know what they decided this week. There was news out of the UK as well, which, if I'm not mistaken, depending on the year, kind of changes, but the UK being the 7th largest economy in the world, had their car sales numbers drop, and they went down by 23%, and that's actually below the pre-pandemic numbers. So even relatively important markets, especially in an economy like the UK, which is one of the 10th largest in the world, they even have pretty bad numbers coming out, and we're starting to get a lot of these kind of negative numbers come out over the next few weeks and even over the past few weeks as well. So as I mentioned, the overseas market news, European markets are mostly mixed. Istanbul being one of the most volatile, being an emerging market. They went up by 2.02%, which was the most positive in Europe. They're suffering with really bad inflation right now. They're over 50% right now, so their currency is devalued quite a bit. Latin American and Canadian markets were mixed. Canada went up by 2.62%. Africa and the Middle East, South Africa taking the crown for the biggest winner there at 2.38%. And then in the far, far east, we have the Hang Seng out of Hong Kong. Say that 3 times fast. They went up 4.34%. Bitcoin and cryptos, one of the things that I saw this week, not a huge amount of news, but one of the things that I saw this week was the mining aspect, right? There were a lot of people that were telling me that Bitcoin couldn't be regulated. Meanwhile, the mining and the entire crypto sector was kicked out of China. They're being a lot of regulation, or they're trying to ban it, I should say, in Russia. And so a lot of the mining capacity, where it was a huge percentage, was China. And now that's transferred over to the United States, to Canada, and Kazakhstan. Those 3 countries are over 50%. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens over the next few weeks or few months, due to the fact that the Biden administration was saying that they need to regulate cryptos and Bitcoin due to a matter of national security. So we'll see if the mining sector in cryptos goes through the same thing that they went with China, where they're literally kicked out of the United States as well. I don't understand these governments. Why don't they just tax it and permit it, right? Then they can get all the business like El Salvador is trying to do. So we'll see what happens with that. There was a $320 million hack, which is the second largest decentralized finance hack ever. There's a protocol or a bridge. Most of you guys, which aren't still in crypto, think of it like a connection point between a lot of the cryptos. It's called Wormhole, and it's one of the biggest protocols between Solana, which is a crypto, and other blockchains as well. There's over $1 billion in value, and it supports Terra, Solana, Ethereum, Binance Smart Chain, Avalanche, and also Polygon, among others. Mostly those 6. But there was a $320 million hack, and this is what I always told you guys about Bitcoin. It's not that you can't make money. It's not that it's going to go up and down. Obviously, there's a lot of volatility. I have no doubt it's going to keep making record highs. But if you're going to invest in a market like crypto, which isn't regulated at all, just make sure you do it right, because obviously in one of the attacks, there was an exchange out of Canada, if you guys remember a few years ago, where they stole hundreds of millions of dollars. Just make sure you do it where you're supposed to, because obviously just like you can make a lot of money, you can lose a lot of money, right? And that's part of the reason why I think we've had so much success over the years, because we look at things analytically, right? It's not just like, oh, it's positive, everything's great. No, there's negative things as well, right? We need to talk about those too. So keep that in mind. Bitcoin overall for the week went up 9.98%, crossed the $40,000 mark, went up to $41,504. I take the cutoff, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, on Saturday morning. So obviously being so volatile, if it goes up and down from that point, just keep that in mind. Commodities, oil is heading for its biggest January gain in 30 years based on strong demand and limited or outpacing supply, I should say. Brent is above $90 a barrel, 17% gain so far in January, booming demand and limited supply. It's up for the 7th consecutive week since at this price level since 2014. U.S. crude went up 6.32% at $92.31. And then we have international Brent, which went up 3.59% to $93.27. A lot of banks are expecting $100 a barrel oil due to the ongoing geopolitical risk. Also, obviously, we're talking about Russia, Europe with the gas situation, and then we have Russia with Ukraine. And it's interesting because if you think about the prices at which things have gone up so far last year, this is another reason why we're going to have a significant increase in cost, because obviously the vast majority of the world still uses oil, gasoline to be able to transport things from one place to another. In the United States, largest economy in the world, the vast majority of products, once they get to the port, are all transported by truckers. And this is one of the things that's going to affect as well what's going on in Canada right now, which I'm going to mention at the end of the video, where we have these protests from the truckers. 70% of the $700 billion market between Canada and the US is through truckers. And the truckers obviously are protesting there in Canada, and they're cutting off the border routes as well. So things are going to get even rougher when it comes to the supply chain. ExxonMobil, one of the largest gasoline companies, I should say, not natural gas. What are they called in English? I always do the Spanish videos first, and I always forget the words in English. Well, let's just call it a gas and oil company. It's an oil major, essentially. They went up by over 6% on Tuesday after they had the revenue from last year jump over 80% year over year. The UK Shell is a company which came out of Norway, let's back up a little bit. Shell officially is Royal Dutch Shell, so it comes from the Netherlands, but they moved their corporate headquarters to the UK. So they have reported their earnings of $19 billion plus in 2021, compared to just under $5 billion in 2020. They expect to do an $8.5 billion share buyback in addition to increasing the dividend by 4%. And if you guys remember, I did a video before our YouTube channel got knocked down. They just took it away for no reason. Wouldn't tell me why. We couldn't recover it. But we talked about the mining companies when oil went negative, right? Shell, I believe, was at $18 or $19. It would have been an amazing investment. But remember, I'm not a financial advisor. This is an investment advice. It's not accounting or legal advice. Do your own research for educational purposes only. U.S. crude for the week went up 6.32% to $92.31. International crude, which is called Brent, went up to 3.59 to $93.27. And I think I already mentioned those numbers to you. Excuse me, but they are expecting more than $100 oil. OPEC and allies, mostly led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, have agreed to cut production by 400,000 barrels during the pandemic. They cut production by roughly 10 million barrels a day. And it's very ironic right now what's happening in the U.S. government, how India, for example, and the United States are pleading for these countries to produce more. Meanwhile, in the United States, they're literally shutting down oil production and even pipelines, which would make it a lot cheaper, which is causing part of the increase. So literally cutting our own oil production for environmental purposes. They say, again, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but I just think it's rather ironic that they're literally cutting back. The United States under the last administration was one of the record became one of the record producing and exporting countries, and now they're scaling back that because of environmental concerns, and everything's going up because we're having to rely on countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia, which is ironic because we have these tensions with Russia and Ukraine. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the best idea in the world, but I don't run the country. Other than that, Russia and China, this is a big deal in my opinion due to the fact that they signed a 30-year gas pipeline, a new pipeline deal, which is going to be settled in euros and not dollars. So I'm going to talk about the debt here in just a moment with the dollar, but we have this acceleration of people relying less on the US dollar, and that's going to be very, very problematic here in the future. Russia is also stopping the export of ammonium nitrate. So we have the cost of food being at record highs right now at the rate that it's increasing. And so most of you guys in the West, the US, Canada, we're not farmers, right? We grow up, we kind of just think that the food comes to the supermarket. We don't think about where it's grown and how it needs to be grown. Well, just to kind of give you a little bit of insight and how we can kind of identify what's going to happen with the economy, food prices are about to go a lot higher. And the reason why is because you need fertilizer to grow food. You plant the food, you give it fertilizer to be able to go ahead and continue to grow. It's like minerals and nutrients that we put in our own body for the food, okay? So ammonium nitrate is one of the principal ingredients that go into fertilizer. Russia supplies 62% of the world's ammonium nitrate. They're going to ban the export of this ingredient for the next 2 months, supposedly due to the fact that they're going to need it for domestic use for the spring. So obviously in the northern hemisphere, even in the deep south, like Argentina and Chile and South Africa, they have extremes in the weather, right? Winter, summer, everything in between. Whereas close to the equator, for example, a country like Colombia, they have a year-round glowing climate because they're close to the equator. So now they're going to ban one of the ingredients that goes into fertilizer, which means that the cost of fertilizer is going to explode, which means that the cost of food, which has already gone up by record prices, is going to increase even more this year on top of the inflation numbers, which I'm going to explain here in just a moment as well. Kraft Heinz, which is the 5th largest food and beverage company in the world, the 3rd largest in North America, announcing that they're going to raise their prices between 6 to 30%, an average of 8% in February, and that's on top of all of the price increases that we've already seen last year. So on top of this problem that we have with the food fertilizer, we're also going to have a problem with the normal inflation because now companies are starting to see that the inflation isn't temporary, like the government was trying to convince everybody that it was, and they're going to start passing those cost increases to the consumer. So if the actual inflation rate was calculated by the amount that we calculated in 1980, according to shadowstats.com, the actual inflation rate right now would be close to 15%, which is at a high since 1947. Think about that. And the actual inflation rate, right, when you go to the store, things haven't gone up 5-10%, right? We've seen things go up by 20-30%. So we're most likely going to see an increase in prices this year, especially for food, in the range of, I would say, maybe 30-40%, maybe as high as 50%. We literally become a third world country overnight. Other than that, precious metals, gold went up by 0.93%, broke the $1,800 barrier again, 1,809, while silver went up by 0.17% to $22.60. Finance and banking news, the U.S. national debt went up to $30 trillion for the first time ever. Record amount of debt is a gloomy milestone for the finances of the country. This is adding to a lot of concerns about people investing in our country, meaning we have a situation now where the inflation that the government is reporting at 7%. Remember, I just told you that the actual number, if they were calculating it with the numbers that they did from 1980, would be 15%. And if it was real numbers of what you and I see at the store, because those numbers don't include, for example, energy or food that the government tracks, it would be probably 20 or 30%. But let's just stick to the 7% number. So if the inflation rate reported by the government is 7%, and people are borrowing the United States money, right? In order to cover our finances, we need to issue debt. And then we have foreigners that are giving us money, right? They're literally sustaining our outlandish way of life. The interest rates are at 3, 4, maybe high 5%. Let's just assume it's 5%. So we're borrowing money. People are lending us money at 5%. Meanwhile, the value of our money is devaluating at a 7% rate. So what's going to happen? less and less people are going to borrow us money because the money that they give us is devaluating at a higher rate that we're paying interest on it. And then on top of that, we have this fear about the finances of the United States. So we have this double whammy now hitting the United States where we're going to have to start borrowing ourselves money, which is what we've been doing essentially since 2008 and 2009, where we monetize our own debt. Now, what's going to happen is, what happens, for example, when everybody stops to borrow money and we can't get money overseas and everybody starts to sell their dollars? Just like anything else, the dollar is going to start devaluating at an even higher rate. And that's when we're going to have an economic crisis, which we've been waiting for quite a long time if the government didn't support, let's say, the economy. We also have problems, aging population. Healthcare costs are going to explode due to the aging population as well, obviously. So we have this double whammy where the cost of the debt is going higher. The debt is going higher at a higher rate. And then we also have a situation where we have extra costs like Social Security and healthcare because of the aging population. Now, this didn't happen, for example, in the previous administration because of, a lot of rule changes. The Trump administration, for example, grew the economy at, I don't want to say he did it right, because I always try to do these videos with a apolitical stance, right? It doesn't matter if you're left or right, it doesn't matter. But the reason why we're seeing, for example, these numbers now and not during the last administration is because the last administration worked to increase the economy at a much faster rate than we're seeing it now. We're essentially reaching a point where we have what's called stagflation, where we have a stagnant economy and inflation. If the economy was growing at a faster rate with the amount of inflation, then we wouldn't have as bad of inflation because the economy is actually expanding at the relative faster rate than what we have in inflation. Does that make sense? That's why we're seeing it now, for example, and not before. Reserve Bank of Australia has maintained its cash rate at the same amount of 0.1%, even though the expected rate was to actually increase. Inflation in France eased from a 13-year high in January. Higher energy prices were up over 19%, almost actually at 20% over a year. So again, remember that the governments don't actually calculate when they report the inflation, energy and food prices, because obviously you and I don't need to eat or buy any energy, obviously. Eurozone inflation rose to a new record high in January, defying analyst expectations for a large drop. The 19-country Eurozone went up to 5.1% instead of a 5% in December. Remember, that does include things like energy and food. We also have a situation where the inflation in CPI in the United States was 7%, but as I mentioned, if it was calculated with the same rate that we had in 1980, according to Shadow Stats founder John Williams, it would be close to 15%, which would be a high since 1947. Thursday, Bank of England imposed back-to-back interest rates for the first time since 2004 and began quantitative tightening. So we have a lot of countries now that are starting to increase their interest rates, cutting back the money that they're injecting to help the economy. Meanwhile, we have the United States just going in the same direction where they're threatening to raise rates, but they're not going to be able to, because as soon as they raise rates, the amount to service the debt that we already have, which has hit just $30 trillion, is going to explode. We're not going to be able to afford it, and the economy is literally going to collapse while they try to do that. So they're going to cut back on that, I think. And the UK energy bills are going to drastically rise after the energy regulation Ofgem announced on Thursday that they're going to increase the cap on prices by over 50% in April. This is the government agency actually reviews the cap on prices every 6 months, and the average household in the UK is going to have their energy bill increase by over 54%, which is a record increase, and households are going to see their costs rise by close to £700 a year, which is about $950. Now, think a little bit further, okay? If consumers are spending more money on things like energy and food, they have less expendiary. I don't think it's even a word in English. They're not going to have extra money to spend to just go buy stuff. Now, remember that the biggest part of the economy, no matter what economy it is, most industrialized economies or advanced economies, let's say, like every economy in the world except for a lot of places in Africa and Asia, for example, the biggest chunk of the economy is consumer spending. In the United States, just to give you an example, it's close to 70%, 70. So if people are spending more money spending less money because they have to pay more for their bills. They're going to spend less on the economy, which means we're in a never-ending spiral where the economy is not going to be able to continue to grow because people are going to have less money because cost of everything is going up. You see how that works? So this is kind of where we're heading. That's how you connect the dots, because in the future, inflation isn't slowing down, especially in the United States. And a lot of these countries are starting to increase their interest rate, but what they don't realize is the inflation is being exported from the U.S. due to everybody using dollars. See? Political news, the ruling Socialist Party in Portugal won an outright majority, which is the second time in history. The third largest parliamentary group there in Portugal now is the far-right Chega party as well. In economic news, which I think this kind of points out what's kind of happening all over the world, where we're kind of going through these extremes, right? And extremes are never, ever, ever good in any situation. In economic news, official data released out of China showed slowing factory growth in January. The Eurozone GDP as well slowed in quarter four, but they did have a 4.6 annual gain in 2021, which is rebounding to the pre-pandemic levels, which is good news. Japan's manufacturing activity grew by the fastest pace in 8 years, so there's some good news on the economic level. Remember, Japan has the fourth largest economy in the world. And then in the monthly report Wednesday, the ADP is stating that the U.S. private sector employment fell by 301,000 jobs in January. Meanwhile, the U.S. Labor Department said that the new claims for unemployment benefits dropped to 23,000 last week, so it dropped by 23,000 to 238,000, and the economy supposedly added 467,000 jobs in January, even as the Omicron variant surged. This was actually really interesting. I saw a graph, which I'll try to remember to get it to my guys when they process the video. The government, just like they fudge the inflation numbers, what they do is they say, oh, we've had the best growth in numbers in the world. When in reality, when you see the actual chart, and it doesn't matter what government it is, because I think big government is always a problem because of corruption and bureaucracy, right? But you can actually see, hopefully I remember, but you can actually see the jobs before the pandemic. We had one of the best economies ever, and then it literally dropped because of the pandemic, and then it's literally right around here compared to the peak. So we don't have good economic numbers because we haven't even gone back to what it was before the pandemic. And it's really funny because the government, as the government usually does, they caused the problem by shutting down everything. Whether or not it was a good thing, we won't get into the politics of it, but they shut down the economies. People lose their jobs. We have a record unemployment. And then they say, oh, we had the best growth ever, when in reality, we're not even back to where we started, right? Which is actually pretty funny. Well, not funny because there's a lot of people suffering out there, but you know what I mean. Corporate news, Tesla surged over 10% on Monday after Credit Suisse, which is a bank, upgraded their stock to outperform. They also are recalling over 53,000 cars with full self-driving beta software because some cars don't come to a full stop at a stop sign, and that's caused a frenzy in Google for Tesla recalls because they're notoriously known for not building very good quality cars. Shares of Netflix went up by over 11% on Monday to over $427 after the investor and activist Bill Ackman bought quite a bit of Netflix. PayPal went down by a record 24% in its worst trading day ever after they announced that they closed 4.5 million accounts and lowered their forecast because they noticed a lot of people are taking advantage of their incentives and reward programs. And Facebook, which caused a lot of the volatility this week, went down by its worst day ever as well. Biggest one-day drop ever by a company in terms of value. They didn't have good earnings, and in addition to that, it's the first time they actually lost a number of users. I guess that's what happens when you start censoring people, huh, Facebook? Amazon surged over 13% after they said that they reported 9% higher sales increase in quarter four, in addition to increasing their Prime membership from $119 to $139. And they also saw quite a bit of revenue due to the fact that they invested in a deal with Rivian, which is another electric car maker, and they did pretty well because of that. And Google parent Alphabet hit a new record high in annual revenue. They went up 41% from 2020 to 2021. $257 billion in revenue. The quarter four revenue was at $75.3 billion, which is up 32% from a year ago. Now you can see why they don't want to stop the pandemic. because they're doing great. Meanwhile, you and I are not doing so great. In technology news, Chinese firm Space Transportation is developing a hypersonic plane that's going to be able to go from New York to China in just over an hour. A winged rocket that's going to be supposedly able to go to 7,000 miles per hour, and they're hoping to have the takeoff in 2024. Can you imagine going to Paris? I just want a coffee in Paris. Get your little thing in your arm, and then you go and have your coffee and come back in the same day. It'd be awesome, wouldn't it? In investment news, head of NATO, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is saying that Europe needs to diversify its energy supplies. I believe that Europe, I have it listed here, Russia accounts for 1/3 of their gas supplies. So there you go again, right? We're stopping all of production because of environmental problems, environmental issues. Meanwhile, Russia and India and China are adding more carbon footprint by even opening up coal-powered factories, right? Power plants. That's the worst, supposedly the worst polluter out there. And they're mining for the gas and oil, and then we have to rely on them. So what's better for the environment? Other than that, Sony Interactive Entertainment announced Monday that they're going to acquire Bungie, the game developer, for $3.6 billion. They're responsible for developing games like Destiny and Halo, which are extremely popular. And then in international news, another winter storm. I don't know if you guys are from the U.S. or not. Some of you are, but I've never seen storms like this before. It's like literally one after the other, one after the other. We're here enjoying the cold as well, getting nice and snug. And then Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Monday said that he's disgusted by the behavior of some people protesting against COVID-19 mandates in Ottawa, and stated that he won't be intimidated. And there are also a dozen of other trucks, farmers, tractors that are blocking the border between the United States and Canada. Remember that 70% of the $700 billion economy between the Canada and the United States are from truckers. So that's going to cause quite a havoc. And they said that they're not going to stand down until he removes the mandate. So we'll see how that turns out. And Wednesday, the U.S. announced that it's sending its fighter jets to assist United Arab Emirates following sorry, I saw some problem with the mic there. Following an attack that they hit United Arab Emirates. So United States, as usual, supporting its allies. In unusual facts, Guinness Book of World Records, the oldest animal living to date is a tortoise living in Seychelles, which is an island off the coast of Africa, to the right of Africa. It went to 190 years old. Unfortunately, it's blind, but it's lived most of its life in St. Helena Island. And anxiety over the U.S. soaring meat prices and supply chain issues has reached a new high. There's a restaurant called Golden Corral in Bensalem, Pennsylvania. There was a brawl that broke out inside of the restaurant due to the fact that they didn't have any meat. And that's probably what's going to happen in the future. More fights over food. Maybe the preppers were right. And in other news and unusual facts and hypocrisy about the rich people, Jeff Bezos is going to require and force a city to dismantle a historic 1927 Dutch bridge to get its $500 million super yacht across the bridge to the sea. And remember, the Europeans and their carbon tax decided not to put yachts in their carbon tax because obviously you and I need to stop driving cars, but it's okay for rich people to drive yachts without an extra tax. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. The like button is not going up in price just yet, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one.